Hey guys, tonight we begin with a peculiar truth. Life is not a straight line, a checklist, or a battlefield. It's a game. A strange, spiritual, often misunderstood game. You're not merely surviving out here, clawing your way through traffic and taxes. You're actually playing, whether you realize it or not. The problem? Most people have no idea they're even holding the controller. Imagine this: you wake up every morning, make your coffee, scroll through your phone, and head off into a routine that feels set in stone. But underneath that daily grind, there's an invisible scoreboard. You're making moves. You're scoring points, or penalties, based on thoughts, words, beliefs, and energy. Sounds woo-woo? Maybe. But in the game of life and how to play it, Florence Scovel Shinn lays it out plain and bold. Your life is a reflection of your spiritual alignment, and whether you're winning or losing depends on how consciously you're playing. This might be the most boring, yet most important, bedtime story you'll ever hear. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through life, assuming it's random, like lottery tickets thrown into the wind, hoping one lands in your hands. But Florence wants you to picture something else. A massive, cosmic chessboard, only the game isn't being played on you. You're the player, and the pieces, they move with your thoughts, your words, your attitude. You're not a pawn, you're the architect. She starts with a bold premise. Life is not a battle, but a game with very specific spiritual laws. Not laws like gravity, but invisible rules, more like emotional magnets that shape your external world. You attract what you focus on. You repel what you resist. You magnetize what you expect. Florence wasn't writing for Wall Street. She wasn't writing for Harvard MBAs or corporate boardrooms. She was writing for everyday people, bakers, teachers, homemakers, shop owners, trying to make sense of why life so often feels unfair. Her answer: you're unconsciously misplaying the game. It's not about hustle, grind, or effort. It's about spiritual alignment. She opens her book with what sounds like a paradox. Most people consider life a battle, but it is not a battle, it is a game. And here's the kicker. She says that those who understand this and learn the rules will win. The rest? They stay stuck in confusion, frustration, and cycles of lack. Let's break this down in modern terms. When you treat life like a battle, you're constantly in defend and attack mode. You're braced for disaster. You're suspicious of good news. You spend your days reacting instead of creating. You brace for overdraft fees, for rejection emails, for layoffs, for heartbreak, and like clockwork, they arrive. It's not magic, it's magnetism. Florence believed that the feeling behind your expectation is what delivers the result. Here's a quirky tidbit from the 1920s. Back then, many people believed luck came from charms, coins, and rabbit's feet. But Florence tossed all that aside. She said luck wasn't about superstition. It was about spiritual causation. That means the root of everything. Your job offer, your breakup, your rent being paid or unpaid, starts as an invisible cause, seeded by your inner world. In other words, your internal energy predicts your external reality. Economists today might scoff, saying that's not how markets work. But even in economics, there's an ongoing debate about the expectation effect, the idea that market movement is often based not on facts, but on feelings. Investor confidence, consumer sentiment, psychological pricing, all mainstream. So maybe Florence was just ahead of her time. She tells a story of a woman who desperately wanted a house. The woman had no money, no connections, and zero logical path to ownership. But Florence helped her play the game differently. The woman started speaking the house into existence, daily affirming it, giving thanks for it, even picturing herself walking through its doors. A few months later, a distant relative passed, and out of nowhere, she inherited a property that matched her exact vision. Coincidence? Florence would say, no, precision. You might hear that and think, okay, cool story. but I can't manifest a sandwich right now, let alone a mortgage-free house. Fair, but the principle remains. You're always playing the game, whether you believe in it or not. And here's the dangerous part. If you're not playing consciously, you're still scoring points. Just probably not the ones you want. Think of your beliefs like autopilot instructions. If you believe money is hard to earn, your subconscious says, "Got it, make money hard." If you believe you're unlucky in love, your subconscious lines up sabotage like a faithful intern. The game obeys your belief system. That's why Florence emphasized words and imagination. These are your game controls. Most people don't realize that constantly saying, "I can't afford that," or "nothing ever works for me," is the spiritual equivalent of tripping your own team on the field. You're scoring own goals with your mouth. Now, let's add a modern twist. According to a 2022 Stanford study, people who visualize their future financial selves, like literally imagine themselves managing money well, are more likely to save, invest, and budget properly. Florence didn't need Stanford to confirm it, but science is catching up to her now. You're already imagining things all day. Worries, regrets, traffic jams, embarrassing flashbacks from 6th grade. The question is, are those imagined thoughts shaping your game board? Florence's brilliance is that she didn't shame anyone for negative thinking. She simply gave them a choice. She taught that your mind is a spiritual factory. What you order with belief, it starts manufacturing in real time. So here's where we begin tonight. If life is a game, and your thoughts are the strategy, your words the commands, and your beliefs the controller, what kind of match are you playing? Are you showing up like a pro, or just panicking through the 4th quarter with no idea how you got here? Don't worry, we've got 14 more rounds to train your game sense. And Florence, she's going to be your sleepy-eyed coach from the 1920s, cheering you on, reminding you that miracles aren't luck, they're law. You open your mouth, and out comes your fortune, or your foreclosure. That's the blunt truth. Florence Scovel Shinn delivers early in the game. She believed your words aren't just idle noise, they're spiritual boomerangs. Everything you say, whether out of habit or panic or sarcasm, becomes a seed planted in the fertile soil of your subconscious. And trust me, that soil doesn't check for context. Let's say you constantly mutter, "I'm broke," as a joke, or "I just know something's going to go wrong." Maybe it's your way of being funny, relatable, self-deprecating. But Florence says, your subconscious doesn't laugh. It doesn't get sarcasm. It just listens, takes notes, follows orders. That tiny phrase, "I can't afford that," echoes through your finances like a slow leak in your plumbing. It drips into your investments, your salary negotiations, your job applications, until one day you're standing in front of your dream, wondering why the door won't open. The answer? You've been locking it with your own mouth. Florence taught that the spoken word has spiritual power, that every time you affirm something, whether good or bad, you're not describing reality, you're creating it. Her favorite phrase was, "Your word is your wand." And if that sounds like a Harry Potter spell, you're not wrong. The real magic, she argued, is hidden in plain sight, on your tongue. Now let's put this in a modern lens. In psychology, there's something called self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell yourself you're bad at math, you're less likely to try, more likely to avoid practicing, and eventually you become bad at math. It's not voodoo, it's cognitive programming. Florence was simply describing this before the textbooks gave it a name. She tells the story of a man who always talked about his fear of disease. Every chance he got, he would bring it up, casually, repeatedly, sometimes with humor, sometimes in worry. Eventually, you guessed it, he fell ill with the very thing he'd been speaking about for years. To Florence, that wasn't fate, that was verbal manifestation. You're probably thinking, so what? I'm not allowed to vent anymore. You are, but Florence would urge you to be conscious of how you vent. There's a difference between expressing temporary frustration and declaring a life sentence. One is therapeutic, the other is spiritual sabotage with a megaphone. Here's a quirky tidbit. In ancient Egypt, it was believed that speaking the name of a god invoked its power. Words weren't communication, they were creation. They had weight, That's why curses and blessings were taken so seriously. Florence, a metaphysical thinker, saw this ancient thread and stitched it straight into modern life. She believed that your voice was your tool for bending spiritual law in your favor, or against you. Now let's mix in some gentle humor. Imagine you're in a coffee shop, telling your friend, "I just attract toxic people. It's my thing." Florence would slowly raise an eyebrow, sip her tea, and whisper, "Do you want that to be your thing?" And here's where it gets uncomfortable. She wasn't big on excuses. You could explain your trauma, your upbringing, your stress, and she'd still come back to, "What are you speaking into your reality right now?" Business leaders today still argue whether the mindset actually affects outcomes in a measurable way. But one thing most agree on: language matters. Top CEOs, athletes, and performers use mantras, visualization, and affirmations, not because they're spiritual, but because they work. Florence just took it a step further. She believed that speaking positively wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Your word, she said, goes out like a spiritual FedEx package and returns with matching results. Speak love, get love. Speak lack, get lack. Speak delay, get delay. The universe has no chill when it comes to accuracy. One woman Florence worked with had a habit of saying, "Every time I get money, something bad happens." And what do you think kept happening? Exactly that. So Florence gave her a new phrase, something like, "I give thanks for unexpected income that blesses me and stays." The woman started using it religiously, and not only did new money appear, but for the first time, nothing terrible followed. Again, skeptics will roll their eyes. But try it, just for a week. Watch your words like they're live wires. Replace "I'm always late" with "I'm learning to be on time." Replace "I never win" with "something good is on its way." Replace "I'm so tired of struggling" with "I'm open to effortless success." And no, this isn't about lying to yourself. It's about retraining your expectation muscle. Because Florence believed that expectation is a form of prayer, and when your expectation lines up with your words, the game begins to tilt in your favor. Want a fun fact? A study from the University of California found that people who repeated positive financial affirmations for 21 days reported significantly less stress around money. That's right, words reduced worry. Florence would have printed that study, laminated it, and taped it to your mirror. She also warned that worry is just a negative affirmation. You're speaking disaster silently, with your emotions. And the more vivid your worry, the more potent its effect. It's like making a detailed vision board for what you don't want. So what does this mean practically? It means that every time you say "this is going to be a disaster," your subconscious perks up and says, "Great, I'll start the checklist." It means that casually saying "nothing ever goes right for me" is like ordering failure from Amazon Prime with same-day delivery. But if you say "I trust that everything is aligning for my good," even if your logical brain doesn't believe it yet, your subconscious starts to rewire its assumptions. One day, you'll be sipping tea in a room you once dreamed of, wondering how you got there. And then you'll remember, you said it. You said it until it stuck. So tonight, as you lay in bed, Florence would challenge you to review your daily vocabulary. What's your catchphrase? Your loop? The little sentences you mutter under your breath or think in the shower. Those are your spells. Those are your blueprints. And if you don't like what you're building, start changing what you're saying. Because in this game, silence is neutral, but speech is a move. And you, my friend, just learned how to play a very powerful card. You wake up late, groggy, slightly panicked. You mutter something about the day already being ruined. You rush through your morning, spill coffee, stub your toe, and by noon you're saying, "Ugh, I knew this day was going to suck." Congratulations, your subconscious has just obeyed its orders. Florence Scovel Shinn wasn't trying to be mystical when she said your subconscious is a servant. She meant it literally, like a highly trained but emotionally blind butler. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't evaluate. It doesn't laugh at your self-deprecating humor or cry when you whisper, "I'm not good enough." It just takes those words, feelings, and thoughts, and builds a reality to match. She compared it to planting seeds. Every belief you affirm, especially emotionally charged ones, gets tucked neatly into the soil of your subconscious. And then, the subconscious goes to work, sprouting behaviors, opportunities, obstacles, and coincidences that prove you were right all along. Ever met someone who says, "I always get overlooked for promotions," and somehow, no matter how hard they work, they do? That's not just bad luck. It might be subconscious obedience in action. Modern science backs this up with a little something called confirmation bias. When you believe something strongly, your brain starts filtering reality to confirm it. You overlook evidence to the contrary and highlight anything that proves you right. Florence didn't call it neuroscience. She called it spiritual law. She told a story of a woman who constantly said, "I can never get through to people." Whether it was clients, friends, or strangers, the woman felt invisible. Florence challenged her to change the phrase to "everywhere I go, people hear me clearly and respond with favor." Within weeks, her interactions shifted. She reported smoother communication, better customer service, and even strangers engaging more warmly. Coincidence? Florence would smile and say, "No, darling, that's the law. Let's make it fun." Imagine your subconscious as a slightly clueless personal assistant named Marv. You say, "Ugh, I'm always broke." And Marv writes it down like a grocery list. "Got it, boss. Let's create some unexpected expenses, a delayed paycheck, maybe a rejection from that freelance gig." But the moment you say, "Money flows to me in surprising and consistent ways," Marv panics slightly. "Wait, new instructions. Okay, let me reroute the next check, open a new door, scramble some serendipity. Let's go." The subconscious doesn't think in right or wrong, it thinks in commands, and your most consistent inner dialogue becomes its script. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. In the 1940s, there was a popular belief in sleep learning, the idea that you could train your brain by listening to recordings during sleep. While that specific technique didn't fully hold up to scientific scrutiny, it pointed to something real. The subconscious is always listening, especially when you're half asleep, zoning out, emotionally vulnerable, or repetitive. So if you keep repeating to yourself, "I'm not good with money," or "I always pick the wrong partner," guess what your inner Marv is working on while you're trying to fall asleep? Florence emphasized that your dominant belief always wins. You might say affirmations out loud, but if your inner monologue is still full of worry, doubt, or fear, your subconscious listens to that voice more. That's why she insisted on rooting out not just outer words, but inner emotions. And this is where modern psychology and spiritual wisdom meet in a warm, slightly awkward hug. Psychologists today talk about the reticular activating system, a part of your brain that filters your perception based on what it thinks you care about. Start looking for red cars, and suddenly you see them everywhere. Tell yourself people are rude, and your brain zeroes in on every eye roll, long pause, or cold shoulder. Florence knew this without a lab coat. She just said, "What you prepare for, you invite. What you expect, you attract." There's also an open debate among business leaders and coaches about whether mindset is overrated. Some argue for action only, show up, do the work, get results. But Florence would disagree, not because she disliked effort, but because she knew that unconscious beliefs can sabotage even your best actions. You can apply to 100 jobs, but if your subconscious believes you're unworthy, you'll radiate hesitation, undersell yourself, or self-sabotage during interviews. The game doesn't reward effort alone, it rewards alignment. Florence's approach was surgical. She wanted people to rewrite their internal scripts, not just for money but for love, health, career, and peace. She taught that the subconscious is your link to divine intelligence. It hears your declarations, and God handles the delivery. There's a powerful line in her book. The subconscious is simply power without direction. That's why you, the conscious player, must learn to aim it. Here's a practical way to test this. Tonight, before you sleep, choose one limiting belief you've been rehearsing. Maybe it's "I never have enough time," or "people don't respect me." Then flip it. Even if it feels cheesy. Try "time bends in my favor," or "I radiate calm confidence, and people respond." Say it 5 times before you sleep. Whisper it like a lullaby to your subconscious. Do that for a week, and when life starts to shift ever so slightly, don't freak out. That's just Marv, finally doing his job right. Florence had a cheeky sense of humor too. She once said that if you really want to test this, observe how people treat you after you silently affirm things about them. Think she's always kind to me, even if she usually isn't. Then see how her behavior changes. Your energy speaks louder than you think. She believed that people, situations, and even random opportunities are responding to your inner expectations. You're not reacting to life, you're setting the tone, like a radio station that the world tunes into. So now, think about what station you've been broadcasting. Doubt FM, Scarcity Talk Radio, 24/7's Worry News. Time to switch channels, because if your subconscious is a servant, and it is, you better start giving it better instructions, and not just once, repeatedly. With feeling, Florence said that impressing the subconscious requires faith and consistency. Tonight, you can start. Whisper your new command gently, let it echo through the chambers of your mind. Because whether you like it or not, the game is in session, and the servant is listening. Picture this. You're sitting in traffic, already 12 minutes late, your jaw clenched, your fingers drumming the steering wheel, and in your head, a full Broadway production of disaster. I'm gonna miss the meeting. They'll think I'm unreliable. My boss will be annoyed. Maybe this ruins my chance at that raise. Honestly, why does this always happen to me? And boom, there it is. Fear, activated. Not a mild inconvenience, not just an emotion, but a full-on spiritual broadcast. Florence Scovel Shinn believed that fear is simply faith in the wrong direction. It's still creative energy, just being used to paint nightmares instead of miracles. When you worry, you're not just imagining scenarios, you're rehearsing them. You're directing mental movies where you're the victim, the failure, the one left out or left behind. And your subconscious, it's in the audience, taking notes, applauding, preparing the stage. She called it reversed faith, and that idea is disturbingly accurate. Because fear uses all the same mechanics as faith. It focuses your thoughts, charges your emotions, activates your imagination, but on everything you don't want. It's like using the GPS in your car to drive to a city you hate, and then being surprised when you arrive. There's a mainstream echo of this in psychology. It's called catastrophizing. It's when your brain fixates on worst-case scenarios and treats them as probable outcomes. Some say it's a leftover survival mechanism. Better to imagine the saber-toothed tiger than ignore it, right? But Florence would say this: you're not in the jungle anymore. You're just catastrophizing yourself into real spiritual setbacks. Let's not forget, your imagination is the most powerful tool in the game, and most people use it backwards. Florence tells a story about a man who feared losing his business. Every day he talked about it, dreamed about it, played out the what-ifs. Eventually it happened, not because he was a bad businessman, but because he infused his fear with such consistency and power, it became a creative force. The irony, if he had used that same vivid imagination to picture success, resilience, or divine guidance, the business might have turned around. The energy was there, he just aimed it the wrong way. Here's a quirky tidbit from the 1800s. Some frontier churches used to pray out loud against fear. They'd gather and declare, "Fear has no place here." They knew, even without the vocabulary of Florence or Freud, that fear spreads like wildfire if you let it sit too long. Florence took this even deeper. She believed that fear doesn't just mess up your mood, it blocks your good. She said that whatever you fear, you draw near. That fear actually clogs the spiritual pipeline, preventing blessings from getting through. Think of it like junk data in your internal Wi-Fi. It slows everything down, drops connections, ruins downloads. And yet, here's the modern dilemma. Fear feels responsible. You fear for your finances, so you obsess over your bills. You fear losing a client, so you micromanage every word. You fear being alone, so you overthink every text. You think you're being proactive, but what if, just what if, you're actually programming loss? Florence would gently shake her head and whisper, "That is not divine order." There's an open debate today among entrepreneurs and coaches. Should you visualize success or prepare for failure? Florence would say, visualize the win. But more importantly, speak it, feel it, expect it, because only then does your subconscious have clear instructions to act on. Let's go practical. Suppose you're terrified of not having enough money to pay rent next month. It's not about pretending you're rich. Florence wouldn't want you to lie. Instead, she'd say, replace the fear. Don't just resist it, override it. Instead of obsessing over the unpaid bill, affirm something like, Infinite Spirit supplies all my needs in perfect timing. I walk in abundance. Doors open when I least expect. You're not ignoring reality, you're redirecting energy. You're using the same brain power that was building a panic spiral to lay the bricks of faith instead. Here's a fun fact. According to a 2020 study in psychological science, participants who practiced positive reappraisal, that is, reframing anxious thoughts into hopeful ones, reported significantly less physiological stress over 2 weeks. Translation: changing your inner monologue literally calms your nervous system. Florence knew this. In her own metaphysical way, she taught that fear weakens your spiritual field, that it opens doors to delay, conflict, and lack. Not because you're being punished, but because you're playing the wrong strategy. Remember the game board? Faith and fear are like two opposing players. Whichever you feed wins the next round. But here's the part Florence emphasized. Faith is always stronger. Why? Because it's aligned with divine truth. Fear is based on illusion. It feels real, but it's a ghost story. Faith, on the other hand, is based on unseen substance. It's connected to source, to possibility, to higher law. And when you choose faith, even if it's just a tiny whisper in a storm of panic, it starts to turn the tide. She tells of a woman facing a serious legal issue. Everyone told her to worry, to expect the worst. Instead, the woman affirmed, this situation is already handled by divine law. I am protected. I am guided. Days before the court date, the case was dropped, completely. Skeptics say, coincidence. Florence says, cause and effect. So here's your challenge. Tonight, as you wind down, scan your mind for fear-based thoughts you've normalized. Are you rehearsing drama, forecasting failure, bracing for betrayal? Catch them, replace them. Instead of, I'm so scared this won't work out, try things are always working out for me, even when I can't see how. Instead of, I don't want to lose this job, say the right opportunities are anchored to me. I trust divine placement. Yes, it will feel weird at first, like you're speaking a foreign language. But remember, your subconscious is always listening, and it's eager for a better script. Fear is loud, but faith is powerful, and power always wins. So whisper something bold tonight, something faithful, something absurdly optimistic. Because Florence would say, your next miracle might be waiting for that one sentence. You speak kindness, and it returns. You speak anger, and it multiplies. You give generously, and one day, somehow, it boomerangs back when you least expect it. Coincidence? Florence Scovel Shinn says, absolutely not. It's spiritual physics. Welcome to one of the trickiest laws in Florence's game of life, the law of return, or as she liked to frame it, whatever man sends out in word or deed, will return to him. Now, if that sounds suspiciously like karma, you'd be right, but Florence makes it more personal, immediate, and sometimes wildly uncomfortable. Because here's the punchline. You're always sending something out. You're not just reacting to life, you're broadcasting, in your tone, your emails, your side-eye, your late-night rants, your passive-aggressive texts, your generosity, your prayer, even your sarcasm. And the world, it's not passive, it echoes, it reflects, it mirrors you with astonishing precision and an unnerving sense of drama. Think of this law like a spiritual boomerang. Florence believed that whether it's kindness, cruelty, complaint, or gratitude, whatever you launch comes back, multiplied. You throw out criticism, it returns in strange forms: delays, bad customer service, flaky friends. You throw out encouragement, suddenly things flow, traffic lights go green, checks show up, your latte gets upgraded, life just sinks. Florence tells a peculiar story of a man who constantly made snide remarks about wealthy people, calling them greedy, corrupt or lucky. And guess what? He never experienced financial breakthrough, not because he lacked skill, but because, energetically, he was rejecting the very thing he said he wanted. He was pushing money away with his judgments. Eventually, Florence convinced him to bless the rich instead. Every time he saw someone successful, she had him affirm that wealth is a sign of divine supply, and there's plenty for me too. Within months, new opportunities opened up. His income increased. His resentment disappeared. Coincidence? Florence calls it calibration. Now, let's get scientific for a second. There's a well-known principle in behavioral psychology called reciprocity. When people receive kindness, they're more likely to return it. Businesses know this. That's why you get free samples, why Starbucks smiles at you, why content creators say smash that like button. They're inviting return energy. But Florence wasn't just talking about social reciprocity. She believed that the universe itself behaves this way, that spiritual law works through invisible channels, that what you give out, energetically, is like a boomerang with a timer, always circling back. You know those people who always seem to get lucky, the ones who say, I just believe the world is kind, and weirdly, the world is kind to them. Florence would say, that's not luck, that's alignment with the law of return. And those people who feel like life keeps kicking them, over and over, Florence would gently ask them to examine what they've been sending out, especially through their attitude. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. In ancient Babylon, merchants were required to keep a clay tablet record of their public behavior and words. Why? Because they believed bad conduct would eventually bankrupt the soul and the business. Florence would have loved that. She'd say your words are spiritual invoices. Your actions are emotional contracts, and the receipts will show up, signed, sealed, and sometimes dramatically delivered. There's an open debate today among spiritual coaches and skeptics about whether energy is real or just a metaphor. Florence doesn't argue. She simply tells story after story: the woman who gossiped and got gossiped about, the man who gave generously and received a mysterious inheritance, the employee who praised his boss behind his back and ended up promoted unexpectedly. Her point? Life listens. Always. And it doesn't just echo, it amplifies. Let's put this into modern terms. Think about your business, your job, your daily relationships. Every snarky thought, every withheld compliment, every act of stinginess. It's not neutral, it has return energy. And if you're wondering why clients ghost you, why customers complain, why colleagues turn cold, Florence would ask, what did you send out? Now, this isn't about guilt-tripping you. Florence wasn't into shame, she was into awareness. Her teachings are like a gentle spotlight. Here's what's happening. Want to try something different? So tonight, let's try. Think back to today. What did you send out? Did you smile at someone who annoyed you? Or did you stew? Did you bless the success of a rival? Or did you quietly hope they stumbled? Did you affirm abundance for a friend? Or did you silently envy them? This law can be ruthless, but it's also incredibly generous, because it works both ways. Send out joy, love, forgiveness, generosity, and it will find a way to circle back, sometimes through strangers, sometimes through promotions, sometimes in mysterious ways you never could have planned. Here's a wild fact. In 2017, a study in the Journal of Consumer Psychology showed that people who regularly blessed others in silence, literally sending out well wishes in their thoughts, experienced higher levels of emotional well-being, lower blood pressure, and increased resilience under stress. Florence would nod knowingly. The game is fair, she'd whisper. You just forgot you were playing. So here's your sleepy time challenge. Tomorrow, become hyper-aware of your emotional output, your comments, your inner dialogue, your tone. Imagine you're placing little spiritual post-it notes into the world, and each one has a return address. Yours. You'll start to notice something. The more grace you give, the more grace returns. The more good you speak, the more good you receive. And no, it won't always be instant. The boomerang takes its time, but it will come back, usually at just the right moment, because the game is watching, and whatever you throw is on its way home. You're trying not to think about the thing, but there it is. The fear, the doubt, the irritation, the debt, the weird pain in your back that you definitely Googled and now regret. You tell yourself, don't think about it. Stop worrying, stop obsessing. But somehow the more you push it away, the more it pulls up a chair, makes tea, and starts rearranging your furniture. Florence Scovel Shinn would say, that's because you can't not think something. You can't erase a thought by resisting it. The only way to truly get rid of a negative pattern, she taught, is by replacing it. Enter the law of substitution. This one's subtle but powerful, like the spiritual version of flipping a switch. According to Florence, you don't overcome fear by pushing it down, you overcome it by filling the space with something stronger, something truer, something aligned with your divine good. She put it like this: you cannot hold two thoughts at the same time. One will always cancel out the other. So if your mind is currently rented out to worry, you need to evict it, not by force, but by flooding the space with a new tenant. A powerful, faith-filled affirmation. Think of your mind like a theater stage. You can't just yell, fear, get off the stage, and expect a clean exit. You've got to bring in a new actor, a bolder character, and give them a script. Florence's version of that script, affirmations. She had dozens of them, beautiful, poetic, rhythmic statements, designed not just to sound nice, but to reprogram your energy, not from the surface, but from the core. Let's say you're worried about money. Again, you try not to think about it, but your brain is already composing a sad violin soundtrack. Florence would say, pause, breathe, and substitute. Try. Unexpected doors fly open, unexpected channels appear. God makes a way where there was no way. Boom. New actor, new script. Fear gets drowned out, and the subconscious starts listening to a new beat. Now, let's make it practical. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head, one you hate, and you try to make it stop, but the more you focus on stopping it, the worse it gets? That's your brain at war with itself. But the moment you replace the song with something else, Baby Shark, maybe, if you're feeling chaotic, it works. You can't hear both tunes at once. Same with thoughts. You can't think I'm broke and I'm financially secure at the same time. Or one has to go. And the one you repeat the most wins the turf war. Florence tells a story of a man who was overwhelmed with fear about a lawsuit. Every day, he'd spiral in his thoughts, try to push them away, then spiral harder. Florence gave him a simple substitute affirmation. There is no power in evil. God is the only power. He didn't even fully believe it at first, but he repeated it. Every time the fear rose, over and over, like a mantra. Eventually, the anxiety lifted, and the case dissolved, quietly, without drama. Coincidence? Florence says no. That's the law of substitution at work. Here's a quirky little psychological tidbit. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, there's a technique called thought stopping and reframing. When a negative or irrational thought shows up, you mentally say stop, and then immediately replace it with a more rational, empowering alternative. Florence didn't use that jargon, but she nailed the same principle a century earlier, and with way more flair. She didn't just want people to feel better, she wanted them to command their spiritual atmosphere, not with denial, but with deliberate, creative substitution. There's still a debate in the business world about whether mindset work is fluff, but Florence would raise a perfectly arched eyebrow and ask, if your thoughts don't matter, why are your results matching your fears? The power of substitution isn't in faking positivity, it's in choosing your inner narrative. So let's try it together. Take one thought that's been haunting you this week. Maybe, I always mess this up. I'll never get out of this debt. People just don't value me. Now flip it. Boldly. Even if it feels like a lie at first. Try, I am aligned with perfect timing and wisdom. Divine supply meets every need. Abundance is flowing. I radiate value, and I am richly rewarded. Say it slowly. Let it land. And yes, your brain might fight back. This is cheesy. This isn't realistic. Shut up. But Florence would smile and say, That resistance, it's the eviction notice. Keep going. She'd remind you that repetition is power, that the subconscious accepts new truths, the way your skin accepts sunlight, gradually, warmly, and only with consistent exposure. Florence even taught that physical symptoms, pain, fatigue, illness, often stemmed from subconscious resistance to good, and one way to release them was through substitution. She once worked with a woman who had chronic back pain. Every day she complained about being unsupported. Florence had her repeat, "I am fully supported by divine law. I stand strong and tall in my good." Within days the pain began to ease, because the words weren't magic. They were medicine for the subconscious, which then adjusted the body. Now here's the tricky part. Substitution takes effort, not force, but focus. You have to be present enough to notice the negative thought, catch it, then pivot. Again and again. It's not glamorous. You won't see fireworks, but you might notice strange things. The anxiety softens. A weird email arrives. A stranger smiles. A payment posts early. Doors creak open that were once sealed shut. That's the law of substitution whispering. I'm working. Keep going. Tonight as you settle in, let's build your substitution reflex. Choose your top 3 negative thought loops. Write them down if you can. Then next to each one, craft a new affirmation. Something bold, something sweet, something with rhythm and hope. Then say them, out loud, 3 times each. Not because you're trying to impress the universe, but because you're retraining your mind, because you're rehearsing a new script, because you're playing the game. And this move, this quiet little substitution, it's your next winning play. You're standing in front of a metaphorical door. You've knocked. You've visualized. You've affirmed. You've prayed with the intensity of someone trying to charge their phone at 1%. But nothing. Silence. Delay. Static. And if you're like most people, your next move is either to kick the door down or give up entirely. Florence Scovel Shinn, ever the spiritual strategist, would place a gentle hand on your shoulder and whisper, "Don't panic. That's just divine timing doing its thing." You see, in Florence's version of the game, not every yes comes on your schedule, because this isn't Amazon Prime, it's spiritual orchestration. And while it often looks like delay, disappointment, or doors slammed shut, it's really just divine GPS rerouting you towards something better, bigger, or simply not yet ready. She puts it simply, man's will is stubborn, divine will is graceful. But here's the catch. If you get frustrated, pushy, or desperate during the delay, you don't speed things up. You actually jam the system. It's like shaking the vending machine when your candy bar is stuck. All that shaking just makes the machine reboot. Florence tells a story of a woman who desperately wanted to marry a specific man. She prayed, affirmed, visualized, but he didn't call. He moved on. For months she insisted he was the one. Finally exhausted, she let go. She surrendered. A few weeks later, she met someone new, someone better suited, kinder, and just as successful. She ended up marrying him, happily. The first man, years later, he went through a public scandal. Florence's point, the delay wasn't a punishment, it was protection. Here's the thing about divine timing. It doesn't care about your calendar. It's not aligned with your planner, your 5-year strategy, or your "I should have had this by now" panic. It's aligned with readiness, both yours and the world's. You might be ready for the relationship, but the other person isn't healed yet. You might be ready for the money, but your habits would sabotage it. You might be ready for the business, but your confidence hasn't caught up, so the door stays closed. Not forever, but until the moment it swings open, leads to a hallway you're actually ready to walk. There's a mainstream echo of this idea in the startup world. Investors often say they'd rather wait for market readiness than launch too early. A great product too soon flops. Florence would have simply called that spiritual right timing. Now let's add some flavor. Ever had a delayed flight, missed a train, or arrived late somewhere, and later found out it saved you from an accident, a conflict, or a mistake? Florence would say, "Exactly. That's divine order. You thought you were behind schedule. Turns out, you were ahead of disaster." There's even a quirky historical tidbit here. In 1906, a woman named Violet Jessup missed boarding a ship due to illness. That ship? The Titanic. Later, she did board the Britannic, and survived its sinking too. Some people call that fate. Florence would call that the mysterious wisdom of spiritual navigation. But this doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. Florence wasn't about passive spirituality. She was about aligned action, moving when nudged, trusting when stalled, and affirming consistently regardless of appearances. One of her favorite affirmations was, "Infinite Spirit, open the way for my right place, right person, and right supply." And then she'd say, "Now get out of the way, because your job is not to force the door. Your job is to prepare for what you've asked for, even if it hasn't shown up yet." Think of it like ordering from a restaurant. You don't go storming into the kitchen yelling, "Where's my order?" every 2 minutes. You sit, you sip your drink, you prepare the space in front of you. That's faith. That's readiness. So if your good hasn't arrived, ask, have I prepared space for it? Am I trying to force something that isn't meant for me? Am I still in alignment with what I said I wanted? Because Florence warns forcing the wrong door can cost you the right one. And here's the wild twist. Sometimes your blessing gets delayed because you haven't fully released what blocks it: resentment, old beliefs, toxic attachments. Florence says those things must be cleared, or else you'll attract what you're asking for, and then sabotage it. So delays aren't always about the thing. Sometimes they're a sign that you are the one still in motion. There's an open debate in modern manifestation circles about whether timing is real or just resistance. Florence doesn't waste time arguing. She simply says, affirm divine timing, then trust it. So tonight, if you're feeling stuck, behind, or ghosted by your dreams, whisper this softly: I do not force, I align. I trust the timing of my good. Say it again. Let your body exhale. Let your anxiety melt. Let your ego take a nap. Because just beyond your current circumstances is a door creaking open. You won't need to knock. You'll just arrive, and it'll be waiting. You check your balance. You sigh. You swipe the card and wince. Another invoice. Another debt. Another postponed dream sitting in your Amazon wish list, quietly judging you. And somewhere deep in your soul, a voice says, it's always like this, just scraping by. Florence Scovel Shinn would sit you down, hand you a cup of tea, and say calmly, debt isn't just numbers, it's a spiritual signal, and lack is not your birthright. In the game of life and how to play it, Florence is brutally clear. Debt is often the outer symptom of an inner misalignment. Not because you're irresponsible or lazy, but because you may be out of sync with the spiritual laws that govern supply. Let's unpack that. Debt, in Florence's view, isn't just financial. It's energetic. When you're in debt, you're operating from a belief in deficiency, that there isn't enough, that you must borrow from the future to survive the present. That money is scarce, and you are not trusted with overflow. This creates what she calls a mental atmosphere of lack. And here's the sneaky part. Even if you win the lottery, that atmosphere will find a way to bring you back into debt, through mistakes, sabotage, or sudden losses. You're not fighting math. You're fighting a belief system. Florence tells a story of a woman overwhelmed with credit card debt. Well, in the 1920s it was store bills and loans, but same idea. The woman felt hopeless, ashamed, stuck. Florence didn't give her budgeting spreadsheets. She gave her a spiritual pivot. The woman began affirming, I deny debt. I now give thanks that I pay all my bills and owe no man anything. She said it daily, sometimes hourly, not as denial of her situation, but as a statement of alignment. Slowly, new income appeared. One of her old paintings sold. A cousin repaid a forgotten loan. Small miracles snowballed. Within a year, she was out of debt. Was it magic? Florence would say no. It was law. Now let's pause for the skeptics. Doesn't this sound like dangerous woo-woo? Just say your debt away. Not exactly. Florence never said ignore your bills. She said stop spiritually reinforcing them. Because every time you say, "I'll never catch up," or "debt is just part of life," you renew the subscription. And here's the psychology behind it. In behavioral finance, there's a known phenomenon called debt fatigue. When people feel buried under debt, they give up trying. They stop making strategic decisions because they believe it's hopeless. Florence was diagnosing this decades ago, but she prescribed faith as the antidote. She believed that once you shift your emotional relationship with money, the outer conditions must follow. One quirky historical tidbit. In the 1800s, there was a French tradition where villagers held a debt burial ceremony. They would write down their debts on scraps of paper, bury them in a field, and hold a feast. Superstitious? Maybe, but Florence would say they were onto something. They were severing emotional attachment to the story of lack. And here's the thing most people miss about Florence. She wasn't anti-money, she was anti-anxiety around money. Her teachings were unapologetically about abundance, overflow, divine supply. But she also warned, if you cling to fear, you block your supply. She described money as a spiritual current, a river, and fear is like throwing boulders into that stream. Every time you obsess about a bill, hoard money from scarcity, or feel ashamed to receive help, you're damming the river. Let's flip that. Florence encouraged her clients to do weird things like bless their bills. She'd say, when a bill comes, bless it, give thanks that you had the service, and affirm that the money to pay it is already on its way. This isn't about delusion, it's about breaking the energy of dread, which is often the real drain on your finances. She also encouraged people to tithe, not because God needs your money, but because giving declares abundance. When you give freely, even a little, you tell the universe, I trust there's more where this came from, and that signal echoes back. Now let's talk business. In today's world, some of the most indebted people are business owners, entrepreneurs running payroll, juggling inventory, maxing credit lines. Florence's advice would still hold, don't just solve the cash flow problem, solve the consciousness behind it. Ask, do I believe in constant supply? Do I trust I'm in divine partnership? Am I operating from panic or peace? Because panic creates chaos, peace creates precision. Florence was also clear, debt is not a moral failing. It's a wake-up call. It's a sign that something in your internal compass needs recalibrating. That somewhere along the line, you traded faith for fear. But the good news, you can trade back, right now, tonight. She'd have you affirm every obligation is now wiped out by divine law. I am free, financially and spiritually. Say it, even if your phone buzzes with a payment reminder. Say it, even if your account is on fumes. Say it until the energy shifts, and it will. Because the law of supply doesn't care about your past mistakes. It only listens to your current vibration. Florence closes one chapter with a powerful truth. There is no debt in divine mind, which means you're not here to live in lack. You're here to align. And once you do, money doesn't become a monster. It becomes a river, a rhythm, a gentle, faithful servant. And yes, your debts already dissolving. You hustle, you grind, you check the numbers, you scroll through side hustle ideas at 1 a.m., hoping the next click finally leads to abundance. And yet, no matter how hard you work, the overflow feels like it belongs to someone else. Like you're just renting success by the hour, hoping it doesn't get taken back. Florence Scovel Shinn would lean in, raise her brow just slightly, and say, wealth isn't earned, it's tuned into. That's right. In Florence's view, wealth is a vibration, not a salary. It doesn't come because you clock in or suffer more. It comes because you align more. The money you're chasing is already circulating. You just need to broadcast the right frequency to receive it. Now, before you roll your eyes and call that new age fluff, let's break it down. Florence believed that money, just like health, love, and opportunity, is a spiritual substance. It flows to people who expect it, who respect it, and most importantly, who feel worthy of it. The problem? Most people carry unspoken shame or guilt about money. They say they want it, but deep down, they feel undeserving, greedy, or afraid. And guess what the subconscious does with that contradiction? Exactly. It blocks the flow. Here's the trap. You might look wealthy on paper, good job, decent income, but still operate from a vibration of lack. That inner scarcity mindset cancels out the outer effort. Florence tells the story of a man who earned a high salary, but never had savings. Every time he got paid, something unexpected wiped it out. A car repair, a surprise bill, a family emergency. She identified that he carried a deep belief: I don't deserve to keep what I earn. Once she helped him rewire that script, he not only saved money for the first time, he started attracting new streams of income. It wasn't about how much he made, it was about how he received. There's a fascinating modern parallel here. Neuroscience has found that your brain literally resists anything that feels unfamiliar. So if abundance feels off-brand to your nervous system, you'll unconsciously repel it. Florence didn't have a brain scan to prove it, but she knew it intuitively. That's why she emphasized expectation. She said your strongest expectation, not your dream board or Pinterest wish list, is what shapes your reality. Think of it like a radio. You can't tune into 98.5 FM and expect to hear what's playing on 101.9. If you want prosperity, you can't walk around radiating fear, guilt, and just get by energy. That's not a match. That's static. And here's where Florence gets bold. She insists that prosperity isn't just your right, it's your natural state. But the world has conditioned you into thinking you must fight for it, earn it, prove yourself worthy. She disagrees. She teaches that you're already connected to divine supply, but your doubts, fears, and low self-worth act like static interference. Let's throw in a quirky historical fact. In the 1920s, radio waves were still a mystery to the average person. People believed tuning into a station was almost magical. Florence used that metaphor relentlessly. She'd say, tuning into prosperity is the same. You don't have to know how it works. You just have to stop turning the dial toward fear. You might be wondering, okay, but how do I change my wealth frequency? Florence offers simple tools. First, watch your self-talk. Are you saying things like money is tight right now? I never get a break. Rich people are all corrupt. Every phrase like that is like broadcasting from Scarcity FM. You're declaring a frequency, and your reality starts tuning to it. So instead, she'd have you affirm, every dollar I spend returns to me multiplied. I am in perfect alignment with divine supply. Money loves me, and I love using it wisely. Say these with feeling, with rhythm. Let them sink into your bones. Second, practice emotional rehearsal. Don't just say the affirmation. Feel what it would be like to live it. Florence believed that emotion is the fuel behind manifestation. The words are important, but the vibration behind them is the real transmission. Third, act as if. No, not recklessly, not by buying a yacht on credit, but by making small symbolic decisions from the mindset of wealth. For example, stop apologizing when you treat yourself to something nice. Stop hoarding your good candles for guests. Upgrade your wallet, your language, your posture. These shifts aren't about faking it, they're about retraining your identity. There's still a loud debate in finance. Is wealth built from mindset or method? Florence says both, but mindset is the foundation. If your subconscious doesn't believe it's safe or moral to be wealthy, no amount of budgeting will fix that. You'll find ways to leak it. She tells another story, this one, about a woman who longed to work with high-paying clients, but felt intimidated by wealthy people. She believed they'd never take her seriously. Florence had her affirm, I am one with the richest people in divine substance. I belong in their world. The woman started radiating confidence, not arrogance, just peace. Within months, she attracted a wealthy client who introduced her to an entirely new network. What changed? Her frequency, her expectation, her receivership. So here's your bedtime assignment. Tonight, lie back, close your eyes, and imagine yourself as someone who expects wealth, not because you're entitled, but because you're aligned. Picture yourself receiving with grace, spending with joy, giving with wisdom. Say softly, I am the vibration of abundance. It flows to me freely, and I use it well. Repeat it like a lullaby. Let it echo through your being. Let your body relax into that truth. Because Florence would say, you don't have to chase the money, you just have to stop chasing the fear. And as you tune your dial to wealth, the signal gets clearer, and soon your world does too. You're gripping the steering wheel of life a little too tightly, watching every expense, holding on to clients that drain you, saying yes to things you've outgrown. Why? Because somewhere in your soul a whisper says, if I let go, I'll lose everything. Florence Scovel Shinn would look you straight in the eye and say, fear of loss is the lock on your supply. This section is all about the clenched fist problem. You're asking for abundance while white-knuckling your entire reality. You can't receive with closed hands. And Florence taught that until you release the fear of losing what you have, you'll block what's trying to arrive. She called it holding on to seeming good. Those things you think you need to keep: the safe job, the tolerable relationship, the small paycheck, the old mindset. Because at least it's predictable. At least it's something. But spiritual law doesn't flow through clenched fists. It flows through trust. Florence tells the story of a man clinging to a job he hated because he feared unemployment. She told him to affirm, my perfect position is already prepared and waiting. He laughed it off at first, until the company downsized and he was let go. But instead of spiraling, he held the affirmation. 2 weeks later, a friend called with an offer: higher pay, better hours, creative freedom. The job had been waiting, but his fear of loss delayed the blessing. The takeaway: when you release, you receive. Now, this doesn't mean you quit your job or ghost your clients tomorrow. Florence wasn't reckless. She was strategic. Releasing doesn't always mean walking away physically. It often begins energetically. Let's dig in. Fear of loss shows up in sneaky ways. You undercharge because you fear losing clients. You accept mistreatment because you fear losing love. You hoard money because you fear running out. You don't invest, don't delegate, don't upgrade, because what if? All of this sends a single devastating message to your subconscious. I don't trust life to replace what I give up, and guess what? That vibration blocks the delivery truck. Florence believed that God or divine intelligence never takes something without replacing it with better, but if you cling too tightly, you never make room. It's like refusing to clean out your closet, but still expecting new clothes to magically appear. There's a quirky historical practice from ancient Chinese philosophy called emptying the cup. A student once approached a master for wisdom. The master poured him tea and kept pouring. It spilled over. The student shouted, "The cup is full." The master smiled. Exactly. You cannot receive if you're already full of what no longer serves. Florence's entire spiritual system echoes this. She knew that fear of loss attracts loss, not as punishment, but as a mirror. You project, "This might be taken from me," and so it is. It's still a hot debate in modern business. Should you hold on tight to your resources, or be generous and trust the flow? Florence says, let go wisely, release the grip, signal faith. Because the most dangerous thing isn't losing what you have, it's blocking what wants to find you. Now, let's get practical. Suppose you've been worried about money. You clutch every cent. You avoid investing in your growth. You delay repairs. You stop giving. Florence would ask, is this building supply or blocking it? Instead, she'd offer this affirmation: what is mine by divine right cannot be taken. I release fear and trust in infinite supply. Another scenario. You're afraid to raise your rates, quit the job, walk away from the draining project. Try, doors close by divine order, and better ones open immediately. The goal is not recklessness. The goal is inner release. Letting go emotionally before you're even asked to act physically. Because when you stop gripping, you start floating. And suddenly, what you thought you had to chase floats to you. Here's a story from Florence's files. A woman had been abandoned by her fiancé, heartbroken and bitter. She refused to let go. She kept affirming, "He'll come back, he'll come back." Florence encouraged her to shift focus, release him, bless him, make space. After weeks of resistance, the woman finally said, "I let him go. I trust the divine to fill this space with something better. 3 months later, she met a new man, kinder, more aligned. They married that year. It wasn't a trick, it was a law. The law of substitution plus the law of release equals sign, the highway for better things. Here's a wild modern example. In 2015, a professional lost her 6-figure job unexpectedly. Instead of panicking, she leaned into gratitude and curiosity. Within a month, she landed a speaking gig. That turned into coaching. That turned into a company. Within 2 years, she made more than she ever had at her job, and with more freedom. Coincidence? Florence would say, no, darling, that's what happens when you release the grip and trust the flow. So here's your bedtime ritual. Tonight, scan your life for where you're gripping, where fear has its claws in your decisions, where you're staying small because of what you might lose. Then whisper gently, what's mine cannot be taken. I release control and receive greater good. Say it again. Say it like your nervous system needs to hear it. Because Florence would say, you're not losing, you're making space, and when your hands open, the gifts can finally land. You wake up to yet another bill on your desk, a passive-aggressive email in your inbox, and that one lingering thought, is anything actually going right? But then somewhere deep inside, a quieter voice, one you almost forgot existed, says be grateful, just be grateful. And that, according to Florence Scovel Shinn, is not just poetic advice, it's spiritual electricity. Gratitude in Florence's world isn't a thank you note or a fleeting warm fuzzy, it's a magnetic power. She describes it as a spiritual accelerant, something that fast-tracks your manifestations and anchors your desires. Why? Because gratitude signals belief, and belief is the spark that ignites divine supply. Florence believed that when you give thanks before the blessing arrives, you're sending a coded message to the universe. I trust you, I know it's done, I've already received it. And that kind of certainty, it moves mountains, or at least, it moves your blocked finances, stagnant relationships, and confused career paths. She tells the story of a woman who was down to her last dime, literally. Instead of spiraling, Florence told her to say, I give thanks that this dime multiplies and blesses me richly. The woman looked doubtful, but she obeyed. That same week, a friend repaid a long-forgotten debt. Then a small inheritance came through. The tide turned. Why? Because gratitude flipped her vibration from fear to faith, from not enough to already on its way. Let's zoom out. Most people practice conditional gratitude. I'll be grateful when I get the job. I'll give thanks after the debt's paid. I'll celebrate once I feel better. Florence flips that on its head. She teaches preemptive gratitude, a kind of spiritual time travel. You thank God for the healing before your body feels different. You give thanks for the soulmate before you've met. You bless the business before your first sale. Because gratitude, when practiced in advance, becomes creative power. There's a mainstream version of this in neuroscience called neuroassociative conditioning. When you practice gratitude for something not yet received, your brain begins to believe it's real. That belief changes your emotions. Your emotions change your energy. Your energy influences your actions. And boom, you begin creating the very thing you gave thanks for. Florence didn't use the science. She didn't need to. She watched it work. Here's a quirky historical example. During the Great Depression, some families gathered every night to give thanks for food they didn't yet have, not out of delusion, but out of determination. And in many cases, food would arrive the next day through neighbors, strangers, even surprise deliveries. Florence would call this grace in motion. The gratitude invited the supply. She also warned about reverse gratitude, when you only give thanks once you're in comfort. She called it a trap. Why? Because it signals to your subconscious that gratitude is conditional, that you're only safe after you see results, and that keeps your energy in waiting mode. Instead, she taught, thank you, Father, for the invisible supply that is manifesting now, not tomorrow, not later, now. Florence even encouraged people to be grateful for their problems. Yep, she said every obstacle is a hidden teacher, that even delays and detours come bearing gifts. When you thank them in advance, You disarm their chaos and uncover their blessing. Hard? Yes, but powerful. Absolutely. Let's go practical. If you're feeling stuck financially, instead of repeating, "I'm broke," Florence would have you declare, "I give thanks for divine wealth flowing to me now in perfect ways." If your relationship is rocky, she'd say, "I give thanks that love and peace fill my home." Even if you're surrounded by chaos, she'd have you affirm, "I am grateful that all things are working together for my highest good." This isn't pretending, it's positioning. You're moving your internal state into alignment with your desired outcome. And guess what happens when your insides match your request? The outer world catches up. There's still debate in productivity circles about whether gratitude actually impacts success. But a 2016 study in Harvard Business Review showed that leaders who practiced daily gratitude made better decisions, reduced burnout, and increased employee engagement. In other words, gratitude isn't soft, it's strategic. Florence knew this. She wasn't just telling you to be nice, she was giving you spiritual leverage. She even taught that gratitude should be verbal, spoken aloud. Why? Because the spoken word carries frequency, emotion, charge. Your words are like tuning forks, striking the atmosphere and calling similar vibrations toward you. And no, she wasn't saying to be fake. She was saying to be intentional. So tonight, start small. Pick 3 things you can honestly give thanks for: your breath, a roof, a lesson learned the hard way. Then pick 1 thing you don't yet have, but desperately want, and say, "Thank you for this blessing that is now unfolding. I receive it fully." Repeat it. Whisper it like a lullaby to your subconscious. Let it anchor you in peace. Let it tune your frequency, because Florence would say, the fastest way to your breakthrough is not begging, it's gratitude. Thank before you see, and soon you'll see what you thanked for. You've been grinding, manifesting, visualizing, affirming like a spiritual bodybuilder, but there's still that gnawing feeling. Am I doing enough? So you double down, push harder, hustle longer. You spend hours researching strategies, tweaking the plan, overthinking every move, because surely more effort equals more results, right? Florence Scovel Shinn would smile knowingly and say, guided action is not the same as hustle. One flows, the other forces. This is the chapter where she drags the entire hustle culture by its well-worn planner. In Florence's game of life, the winner isn't the one who tries the hardest, it's the one who aligns the fastest. Let's break that down. Florence taught that action is important, but not just any action. The kind of action she endorsed, spirit-led, inspired, synchronized with divine timing. She called it guided action, the gentle nudge, the inner knowing, the phone call you're prompted to make, the offer that feels right, even if it defies logic. What she rejected: panic-based action, hustle rooted in fear, moves made from "if I don't do this, everything will collapse." That kind of energy, she warned, doesn't create, it scrambles. She tells a story of a man who desperately wanted a business breakthrough. He networked tirelessly, stayed up all night reading self-help books, chased every opportunity. Nothing worked. Exhausted, he finally surrendered and affirmed, "I trust the divine to reveal my perfect next step." A day later, a friend casually invited him to an event he hadn't planned to attend. At that event, his future business partner, it wasn't about effort, it was about alignment. Here's a modern echo of that idea. In productivity science, there's a growing movement called deep work. The concept that meaningful results come from fewer, focused, intentional tasks, not constant busyness. Florence was preaching this long before it was cool, and she would have told you this. Some of the most powerful moves you'll ever make will feel easy, natural, guided. She taught that when you're in spiritual alignment, you don't need to force outcomes. You co-create with divine intelligence. You act, but not out of desperation, out of calm inner knowing. Let's contrast that with hustle-based action. Imagine 2 people starting the same business. Person A wakes up anxious, opens 30 tabs, tries every strategy they see online, takes 5 calls they hate, stays busy all day, ends the day fried. Person B wakes up, prays for guidance, gets a strong nudge to follow up with an old contact, one email. That turns into a contract. That turns into referrals. Who wins? Florence would say, the one who moved when led, not the one who moved the most. There's a quirky tidbit from ancient Greek philosophy here. Socrates believed that the wisest people were not those who knew the most, but those who listened the best. Florence would say the same is true in the game of life. Listen for your cues, your gut, your spiritual instructions. So how do you know if your action is guided or just hustle in a halo? Florence gives clues. Guided action feels light, even if it stretches you. Timely, like the window just opened. Anchored in peace, not pressure. Satisfying, even when there's risk. Forced action feels urgent, but not grounded. Draining, motivated by should, or what if I miss out. Heavy, crowded, slightly panicked. She'd have you affirm, divine intelligence directs me perfectly. I know what to do, and I do it calmly. This takes trust, patience, stillness, traits the modern world often mocks. But Florence would argue that stillness is not laziness, it's strategy, because sometimes the delay in your results isn't due to inaction, it's due to unguided action. You've been trying to climb a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. She tells of a woman who kept launching product after product, trying to make it work. None of them sold. Finally, she paused, asked for guidance. In meditation, she got the phrase, "Go back to joy." She revisited an old project she had abandoned, the one she loved creating but thought was impractical. That project became her breakthrough. Guidance often looks impractical until the fruit shows up. Still unsure? Florence gives one more clue. Guided action leaves no residue. You don't feel fried, resentful, or bitter afterward. You feel expanded. And here's a wild real-life parallel. Richard Branson once said that his best ideas came while kite surfing. Oprah credits prayer walks. Steve Jobs took meditative hikes. None of them claimed their brilliance came from staring at spreadsheets for 12 hours straight. Florence would say, exactly, that's divine guidance speaking when you finally shut up. So here's your nighttime practice. Before sleep, ask, what is my next right action? Where do I need to stop forcing? What has been whispering to me that I've ignored? Then say aloud, I am divinely guided in all I do. I act with peace, and results unfold in perfect ways. Repeat it. Let your nervous system unwind, because Florence would say, when the action is guided, you don't chase the result, it finds you. So rest, listen, and when the nudge comes, move. You're scrolling through social media, and there she is, the girl who got the promotion, the guy who launched the successful business, the couple who just bought the house, had the baby, and somehow still have time for yoga and green juice. And before you can catch it, that sinking feeling creeps in. Why not me? I work hard too. Maybe I'm just not meant to win. Florence Scovel Shinn would shake her head slowly and say, comparison is the enemy of multiplication. She taught that envy, jealousy, and resentment are not just petty emotions, they're spiritual blockages. When you resent someone else's good, you unconsciously reject that same good from flowing into your own life. It's harsh, it's uncomfortable, and it's absolutely transformative. Florence didn't sugarcoat it. She said flat out, you cannot receive what you secretly resent. That means if you're judging the wealthy, you'll struggle with abundance. If you're bitter toward the successful, your own progress will stall. Not because you're bad, but because your subconscious thinks success is unsafe, unfair, or something to hide from. That's a massive contradiction. She tells the story of a woman who desperately wanted to grow her business, but constantly criticized rich people for being showy, wasteful, and selfish. Florence helped her realize that her words were canceling her prayers. She taught her to affirm, I bless the success of others. What God has done for them, God now does for me. And when the woman started practicing that, not just saying it, but feeling it, new clients, partnerships, and even speaking invitations began to arrive. her entire field of energy shifted. Here's the truth. Love multiplies. Envy subtracts. And Florence would argue that this applies not only to wealth, but everything: romance, health, reputation, opportunities. If someone else has it, and you react with bitterness, you're spiritually saying, that belongs to them, not me. Let's bring in a modern take. In psychology, there's something called negative social comparison. It's when viewing others' success diminishes your self-esteem and motivation. But here's the kicker. Studies show that when people reframe those moments as inspiration, not competition, their creativity and optimism increase dramatically. Florence knew that already. She didn't want you to pretend envy doesn't exist. She wanted you to transform it. She taught people to see others' success as proof that the good is circulating, that if it's happening for someone else, it's already in your neighborhood. There's even a quirky historical note. In 18th century France, when someone in your village got married or had a baby, you were supposed to celebrate publicly, even if you hated them. Why? Because it was believed that jealousy could curse the flow of blessings through the town. Superstition, maybe, but Florence would say they were accidentally protecting the vibration of the collective. So how do you apply this? Start with honesty. Look at where comparison lives in your mind. Is it that friend who always catches a break? That influencer with the seemingly perfect life? That sibling whose kids behave like they're in a cereal commercial? Wherever your envy flares, that's where your subconscious thinks you can't have that thing. And Florence wants to flip that script. She'd have you say, I rejoice in the success of others. It proves what is possible for me. At first it'll feel fake, awkward, forced, good. That means you're overriding the old pattern. Now let's talk business and money. If you're growing something, brand, business, channel, career, envy will absolutely try to creep in. Florence says, don't suppress it, bless it. See someone with 1 million followers, say, I bless their expansion. I am next in line for my perfect good. See a competitor land a big client. Whisper, there's more than enough to go around. My supply is infinite. Florence was savage about this. Whatever you criticize, you push away. Whatever you praise, you pull toward you. And here's a powerful perspective shift. She offers, if someone else is doing what you want to do, don't feel behind, feel calibrated. That person is a mirror, a preview, a cosmic heads up that your blessing is nearby. Florence would say that every time you resist someone else's good, you're yelling at the delivery truck. Not me, wrong address. But every time you rejoice, you're waving it down. Right here, I'm ready. She tells the story of a man who hated a wealthy neighbor. Every time he saw the man's new car or expensive clothes, he'd mutter something negative. Florence challenged him to bless the man daily, even silently. Weeks later, he got a promotion, one that had been delayed for months. Why? Because he finally removed the spiritual block. So here's your wind down ritual. Scan your mind for anyone you've secretly judged, resented, or compared yourself to today. Then say gently, I release envy. I celebrate the good of others. Their success expands the field of what is possible for me. Breathe that in. Florence would say, when you love what you see, you become a match to receive it. So love boldly, bless freely, and your own blessing, it just got a lot closer. You think you've moved on? You're manifesting, meditating, affirming, drinking herbal tea with oat milk. You're spiritually grown. But then, someone mentions that person, or that betrayal, or that awful thing, and your stomach knots, your chest tightens. The past suddenly sits beside you like an uninvited ghost. Florence Scovel Shinn would sigh softly and say, you cannot move forward with chains on your ankle. In Florence's game of life, forgiveness is not a virtue, it's a strategy. It's not about being noble, it's about being free. She taught that holding on to resentment, guilt, or shame is like trying to run a marathon with an invisible backpack filled with bricks and wondering why you're so exhausted. She even called forgiveness the great spiritual eraser. It clears the clutter, cuts the karmic cords, rebalances the field, and most importantly, it unblocks your supply. Let's go there. You can be saying affirmations, visualizing abundance, praying for peace. But if you're harboring bitterness in a dusty corner of your heart, Florence says you're running interference, because you're telling the universe, I'm still anchored to that pain, and where there is emotional clutter, blessing cannot land. She tells the story of a woman who couldn't seem to attract love. She tried everything. New wardrobe, affirmations, social outings, nothing worked. Eventually, Florence asked if there was someone she hadn't forgiven. The woman hesitated, then mentioned her ex-husband, whom she had silently cursed for years. Florence gave her this affirmation: I fully and freely forgive him. I bless him on his path, and I release us both. Within weeks, a new man came into her life, kind, attentive, and completely different from her past. Coincidence? Florence would call it spiritual physics, because here's the core of her teaching. You must clean the emotional house to make space for miracles. Forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about disconnecting from what is draining you. Now, let's get honest. Forgiveness sounds lovely, until you're asked to actually do it. Forgive the friend who betrayed you, the boss who humiliated you, the parent who wasn't there. Florence never pretended it was easy, but she insisted it was necessary. She even went further: you must also forgive yourself. That's often the hardest part. Florence believed that guilt, regret, and self-punishment are major blockages in the spiritual flow. They keep you small, stuck, afraid to receive, and until you release them, the game remains rigged by your own hand. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. In some ancient Polynesian cultures, communities performed a ritual called Ho'oponopono, which means to make right. It was a group forgiveness ceremony where everyone, offender or not, took turns saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. Florence would have loved that, because the ritual didn't just restore harmony, it restored flow. Modern psychology echoes this too. Studies show that people who practice active forgiveness have lower cortisol levels, reduced chronic pain, improved immune function, increased financial optimism. Yes, really. Because forgiveness doesn't just soften your heart, it softens your vibration. It moves you from scarcity to trust, from defense to openness. Florence had a bold affirmation for this. I forgive everyone. I send love to all. I am free, and they are free. My supply now flows unobstructed. She taught that when you forgive, you send a signal to divine intelligence. I'm no longer bound to what hurt me. I'm ready for what blesses me. And here's something radical. She also believed that even forgiving life itself was sometimes necessary. The setbacks, the timing, the things you wish had gone differently, because resentment toward life delays your destiny. So how do you actually do this forgiveness thing? Florence made it simple, not easy, but simple. Name it. Who or what are you still angry at? Write it down. Say it out loud. Feel it. Don't pretend you're not mad. Feel it. Don't wallow, just witness. Release it. Use her affirmation. Or try, I forgive this fully. I release it completely. I reclaim my energy now. Bless it. Yes, bless it. Florence believed that blessing what hurt you is the final severing chord. When you can say thank you for the lesson, you've neutralized the charge. Remember, forgiveness doesn't mean you condone the hurt. It means you're done carrying it. You're choosing spiritual mobility over emotional baggage. Florence even taught that some physical ailments disappear after forgiveness. Why? Because the body reflects what the spirit refuses to release. So here's your gentle bedtime assignment. Think of one person, situation, or version of yourself that still holds emotional weight. Then say softly, I forgive, I release, I bless, I am free. Repeat it. Feel it. Shift. Let the energy lighten, because Florence would say forgiveness is the final code that unlocks overflow, and the more you forgive, the faster the good finds you. You've read the quotes, whispered the affirmations, fought the fear, you've forgiven, released, declared, and probably side-eyed your own reflection, wondering, am I even doing this right? Florence Scovel Shinn would smile softly and remind you, you don't win the game of life by control. You win it by catching a divine idea. Let's slow that down, because this final section, it's the climax of her teachings. Florence believed that the highest spiritual achievement wasn't grinding harder or repeating mantras on a loop. It was becoming still enough, aligned enough, and open enough to receive a divine idea, a flash of wisdom, inspiration, or inner guidance that shifts everything. Not just a good idea, not a clever move, a divine idea, something so precise, so synchronistic, that when it arrives, you don't chase it, it carries you. She says, every man has a place which he is to fill, and no one else can fill, something which he is to do, which no one else can do, and divine ideas are how you find that place. They come when you're ready, and they always come custom-made for your soul. Florence tells the story of a woman stuck in a dead-end job. She affirmed daily, divine intelligence now reveals to me the perfect plan. Weeks later, she got the sudden urge to visit a bookstore she hadn't been to in years. She bumped into an old classmate. That classmate was starting a company and needed someone with her exact skill set. That one nudge unlocked an entire new path. Coincidence? Florence would say, no, that's the rhythm of divine law. Now, here's the key. You don't force a divine idea, you make room for it. Florence teaches that when your mind is filled with fear, worry, resentment or control, you drown out the whisper. But when you live in alignment, through gratitude, forgiveness, trust, faith, you create a spiritual vacuum, and nature hates a vacuum. Divine ideas rush in to fill it. It might arrive in the shower, on a walk, during meditation, or in the middle of a breakdown. It often sounds like, call her, take the course, let go now, that thing you loved as a kid, go back to it. It won't always make sense, but it will feel true. It won't always feel logical, but it will feel light. And once you act on it, you stop striving, you start flowing. Modern creativity experts call this flow state. Entrepreneurs call it alignment. Artists call it muse. Florence called it divine transmission. She believed every human being was a spiritual receiver, constantly tuning into either static fear or signal truth. She'd say, when you catch the signal, the path appears. Here's a quirky historical detail. Thomas Edison was known to take naps with metal balls in his hands. As he drifted off, the balls would drop and wake him, allowing him to catch the twilight moment between consciousness and sleep, where most of his breakthroughs arrived. Florence would say he was catching divine ideas, just without calling them that. And here's what makes her philosophy radical. You only need one divine idea to change everything. That's it. One idea can unlock your purpose, heal a relationship, start a movement, solve a long-standing problem, birth a book, a business, a brand, a breakthrough. But you won't catch it in chaos. You catch it in trust, in stillness, in faith-filled expectation. So here's your closing practice. Tonight as you lay your head down, say, Divine Intelligence, I'm listening, I'm ready. Reveal to me my next step. Then hush, don't fill the silence. Don't demand clarity. Just become the open sky, and let the lightning flash when it's time. Florence believed that divine ideas are always available. Like stars hidden by daylight, you don't need to create them. Just wait until your sky is still enough to see them. And when you do, don't hesitate. Move. Because in this game of life, the most successful people aren't always the loudest, fastest, or most prepared. They're the ones who heard something sacred and dared to follow it. So trust that whisper. You've been preparing for it this whole time. And Florence, she's smiling now. Because you're finally playing the game the way it was meant to be played. Hey, you made it. Deep breath in, let it go. Again, you've just journeyed through Florence Scovel Shinn's timeless map of spiritual strategy. 15 chapters, thousands of words, all leading back to one quiet truth. You are not here to suffer. You are here to play. Consciously, boldly, joyfully. Close your eyes now, and imagine yourself stepping out of the fog of fear and into a clearer, softer place. The weight you've been carrying, it's dissolving now. With every exhale, the grip of old thoughts loosens. With every inhale, faith replaces it. You don't need to do everything tonight. You don't need to understand all the laws. You just need to remember, you're already connected. The supply, the healing, the guidance. It's not somewhere out there, it's within you, around you, waiting for your signal. So let your mind soften, let the static quiet. Hear that hum beneath the silence. That's the rhythm of divine order, guiding you, gently, toward your next step. And if you wake up tomorrow with no grand plan, no thunderbolt moment, that's okay. Florence would tell you, just start the day in trust, smile at the unseen, bless the mess, speak with intention, and above all, play the game with love. You've already shifted more than you realize. Now sleep, dream deeply, and let divine intelligence finish what you've begun. You're not behind, you're right on time. You always have been.